I'm Kira Cleveland, and this is Human Intelligence. With my co-host, Ned Hayes, we talk about the importance of human creativity in the age of AI. Welcome to the future.
But what are you trying to be free of? The living, the miraculous task of it. Love is for the ones who love the work, an essential part of what it means to be human and to feel the humanity in other people. Philosophy, psychology, poetry, art, and spirituality.
The work is what matters, that the work is actually what we're doing here. The fact that it was published at the end or that it was read out loud, that's almost incidental to the process of work that we are doing on ourselves. The Human Intelligence Podcast is excited to welcome Joseph Fasano to the show today. He's an award-winning poet, novelist, and teacher. His writing has been translated into more than a dozen languages, and he's celebrated for what Ilya Kaminsky calls a lush drive to live, even in the darkest moments. Fasano's latest book, his 10th, The Teacher, will be released on December 1st. So we're very happy to have Joseph with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Ned.
Well, part of the reason that I invited you to the show was that you had this wonderful poem for the student who used AI to write a paper. And I wondered if you'd do us the honor of maybe reading it first, and maybe we could start there.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. This is a poem that was exactly and is exactly what the title says. I was teaching a class and asked the students to write some papers in the traditional manner, and a student had turned in a work that was, clearly developed by AI. I mean, the story has a kind of happy ending, which is that after I shared this piece with the student, we had a few very productive meetings. We talked, and the paper that the student ultimately ended up producing was wonderful, even in its human flaws. It was very, very brilliant. And so this is a tiny poem called For a Student Who Used AI to Write a Paper. The first two lines have caused some confusion. I get letters about this poem a lot and emails, but the first two lines, as hard as it is to imagine me holding a physical copy of a paper in these eras, simply refer to me dropping the paper into the grass in a bit of a sigh. For a student who used AI to write a paper. Now I let it fall back in the grasses. I hear you. I know this life is hard now. I know your days are precious on this earth. But what are you trying to be free of? The living, the miraculous task of it. Love is for the ones who love the work. It's funny that I mentioned that I get a lot of mail about that letter, and that can be a good thing and it can be tricky too. But one thing I do often say, I don't say much about my own poems, but is that it's not a poem about homework. That final line is really not about something. It's just a little poem about what happens when we really get in the habit of taking shortcuts, emotionally and intellectually, and we maybe find it imagines the scenario in which we find ourselves one day looking into the eyes of somebody who's asking us to do the greatest work of all, which is to love them. And we find that we've taken some shortcuts and we've lost the ability to do that. So it's something that I think about a lot, and I appreciate you reaching out to me about that piece. And I think we are in a very crucial moment for humanity.
So when you talk about the work, you aren't merely talking, as you pointed out, about homework. You're
Mhm.
talking about the much larger work of being human.
The work of being human, focusing on process.
Mhm.
We will very quickly realize as we look at more and more AI generated art that what moves us about a piece of art is the fact that some other human being felt that way and felt so compelled to create something. So the process is not just a kind of hokey, new agey way of referring to, something about, something about loving the journey. I mean, and
Mhm.
that's part of it too, but it really is an essential part of what it means to be human and to feel the humanity in other people. It's how we grow. It's how we are. It's how we keep becoming.
It's how we keep becoming. That's such a key line there because the honest truth about AI systems is that they don't really keep becoming. They aren't really learning anything. They are systems that are ingesting information, creating a model, and then outputting information, but they aren't actually becoming a greater thing. Uh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. If I can just jump in, I think that's very well said, Ned. And I think that's the key because in some sense they continue to become better and better at what they do. They improve, but I think underlying this whole conversation is a question. How do we define improvement as individuals and as a civilization? How do we define becoming? When we get so interested in results oriented thinking in terms of, what has been produced, how is it produced, I think we have to have a more intelligent conversation about AI than we do normally in the social media spaces. Because look, we're talking about an enormous tool.
Mhm.
I hope that AI does keep becoming better and better at solving medical predicaments
Right,
and modeling the brain and figuring out, cures for diseases and whatever the case may be.
right.
But I think exactly as you're suggesting, if I may, is that when we have that sense of that's all that improvement looks like,
Mhm.
and we sort of have a general sense of what it means to get better at something, we can lose our humanity. We can lose our sense that maybe what it's about to grow our souls is not always these kind of immediately results oriented growth. Maybe that actually can come at the expense of who we are as individuals. So yeah, I think it's really important to dissect and think about what we mean by right becoming, spiritual becoming, becoming more of ourselves can look a lot like taking a step back on a particular day, can look a lot like a long wintering period of gestation, can look like a lot of different things.
Right, right. And it looks like being involved with our fellow human beings and being connected to them, and even being connected to them in uncomfortable ways, trying to work
Yeah.
out something that you may disagree with somebody on, and yet not just writing them off. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking especially of Joyce Carol Oates' recent post about wondering why someone wealthy would not have the capacity to write something about a book they enjoyed or a movie they went to or a sunset that they walked towards or a rainbow they saw. And ironically, of course, Elon Musk promptly jumped on and decided that the post was about him.
Yeah, look, I think that there's a lot of how much do I want to say about that? But I think that
Yeah.
we all have our own pathologies. The last thing I am is self-righteous, but I think that there is a very clear pathology that someone like that has that enables him to rise to the top of a broken system.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about, I saw that exchange that Joyce Carol Oates had, I have my own opinions about whether or not it's kind of worth it to get into that kind of exchange,
Right,
but
right.
she did, and there you are. And the thing is also those exchanges that they don't end up helping anyone because, and I don't imply that Joyce Carol Oates is doing it in this manner, but they're very performative conversations that are not conversations that really
Right, right.
just
I
kind of,
guess my overall point was that she was making a point about who we are in the world goes beyond the kind of zero sum game of how much money have you made that day.
oh yeah, yeah, of course. And of course,
Yeah.
insofar as she says that, it's absolutely right. And there are assumptions about what someone doesn't share online, versus what they are or aren't. But yes,
Yeah.
I think when we do look at a lot of the people who rise to positions of power, rise to positions of financial dominance in our system, you do see a lot of that humanity lacking. And
Yeah.
I think that's obviously true and patently true. And the question becomes, what do we do? And that's why I think it's great that you for one, invite people on to have these conversations that in these little pockets of hopefully human conversation can help, I think.
Absolutely. Well, since we are talking about human conversation, one area that is under attack in the academy, and especially from the tech sphere, is the humanities as a discipline, as an area of continued investment, and
Hmm.
as a cultural touch point. I mean, 100 years ago, the humanities were the place that people went in order to deepen themselves and to deepen their prospects. And now it's often discarded as a not a very vocational tool, which of course is not the point of the humanities. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit about
Yes.
what is the point of the humanities? Why should we study them?
I think there are a couple points here. The first is that, again, if we sort of unpack what it means to study something and we take a less instrumentalist view of it, just as you're suggesting, and we say, look, we're going to study something not just for its potential financial gain or its potential, gain in the marketplace.
Applicability. Yeah.
Right. So that's of course, I think, and anything that if you get to a level of some spiritual depth, you understand. But however, I think there's even a further point. Even if we buy into this sort of somewhat cynical notion that we've, I think, bought into as a culture in the West for the past 30, 40, 50 years, and certainly the last 10 and 20 years, this idea that, look, if you want to get a job, forget about the humanities and go, learn how to code, learn how to, or go into STEM. And of course, we need STEM. We need
Yeah.
these people. What the irony, of course, is that I think the rise of AI is going to actually end up taking most of those jobs. And so you
Right.
get people
Right.
who kind of cynically sat down when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. Of course, people can really love these things. You can have a passion for the sciences.
Yeah.
You could say, I really love to code, but maybe more people than might have otherwise were guided into these sectors thinking that's the sure way to get the job. Forget
Mhm.
about the core class I have to take on Shakespeare. Forget about thinking about philosophy and the subjectivity of the human experience. Forget about thinking about ethics and the complications therein.
Yeah.
And let me get my job. And there you come at the end of the assembly line, as it were, say 22, 23 years old, an undergraduate degree, $250,000 in debt, and now AI has taken your job in the first instance. So I think that, and I wrote a piece relatively recently and shared it online about how education coincides with this development of AI. And maybe this is seeing it through rosy colored glasses, but I think we might be in a unique opportunity to reassess the position of the humanities in the world. I think we can look back and or look forward and say, even if we want to think of it from this unfortunately
Right.
cynical perspective from the marketplace, this is an opportunity to lean into what the human can do.
Right.
We need to say, what can humanity do that these models, as you said very insightfully a couple minutes ago, however much they improve, that these models are seemingly unable to do unless they take this quantum leap to consciousness.
Mm.
And those are considerations of artistic thinking, aesthetic thinking, philosophical thinking, thinking about values, thinking about ethics, being consultants in workplace environments on ethical situations. Practically speaking, as it were, there are a whole slew of jobs and opportunities for people to step into. So that's the part that I don't think is being spoken about enough. That's not even to say the part that I think most of us really would just get right on board with, which is it makes you a fuller, deeper human being to be
Yeah.
able to cultivate those parts of your soul that I, for one, value very deeply: philosophy, psychology, poetry, art, and
Mhm.
spirituality.
Yeah. Yeah. All the aspects of the human experience that have lasted for centuries, for many millennia, and have expressed themselves in a variety of different religions and ethnographies and cultural expressions. Those kind of verities of the human experience will outlast any technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There it's tough. There are days when, it's hard to have hope, and then there are other days where you say, and I believe this firmly, Ned. I wrote in a new book of mine that's coming out about a father and a son. The father is talking to the son about hope, and he says, look, ultimately it's an hope is an action. It's the fact that you look down and you see one foot putting itself in front of the other. It's the fact that you see your hands continuing to work, you feel your heart continuing to work. And so to just wake up every day and to try to create something human, to try to create something beautiful, and to try to create something true, that word that has come
Mhm.
to mean very little in our
Yeah.
era. I think if we could just keep doing that on these individual levels, working with small pockets of people and grow and keep that little flame alive,
Yeah.
who knows what bonfire might be lit or relit in the future.
You're kind of echoing a line from Cormac McCarthy, who said, "Keep a little fire burning, however small."
Is that that's a
Yeah.
wonderful. I love Cormac McCarthy. I'd forgotten that line, and yeah, he seemed to understand something about the human and even the shadow side of humanity. There's an
Yeah.
example. McCarthy is an example of someone who looked very deeply into the shadow side of humanity.
Mhm.
When we repress that, when we either performatively in public places pretend that we don't have that shadow or that other people, and project it into others. That's
Hmm.
another part about being human. Being human doesn't just mean, okay, great, I can appreciate the puppy dogs and ice cream that a computer can't appreciate. It
Yeah.
also means, what is all this muck and shadow work inside me? How do
Yeah.
I face it? Because ultimately, unless AI takes over entirely, we're steering it or at least releasing it in some way. So we are
Yeah.
obligated to be clearer with ourselves. I often say, Ned, that every quantum leap in technological advancement in
Hmm.
humanity requires at least as large a quantum leap in our self-awareness. So if
Mm.
you think about the fact that the printing press gets developed, we have very quickly as a society had to sort of decide, what are we going to use it for?
Right.
Nuclear technology, okay, the
Hmm.
advent of that. We cannot just stumble blindly and unconsciously. We have to say, what are we going to use it for? How are we going to steer it? And AI, I think, is something we've never, of course, seen in the human history. I think
Hmm.
we are obligated to have profound conversations that raise our level of consciousness. I would love to see things like more mandatory classes in ethics and self-reflection and things like that that young people could have at an earlier level. Presenting young people with little ethical quandaries and how would you work this out? What would you do? It's something I like to do with my individual students, and I think it's necessary to grow in that way as technology grows exponentially.
Right, right. Creating technologies without the infrastructure of actual deep thinking around their
Mm.
implications and their usage and the ethics of deployment and how human beings will interact, it is not just a deficiency, but an almost criminal activity of just releasing something that is firing blindly into the dark.
Yeah, it's very negligent.
Yeah. So, in this era, you and I are both writers with published books, and I think we've probably both seen our books ingested by AI. And somebody has built a model, a mathematical model out of those books. And I wonder if you might share your thoughts on some of the lawsuits that are out there, some of the ways that poets and writers can grapple with their work being ingested and maybe regurgitated by these systems.
Yes, I think that as I consider what the consequences are of AI scraping the work of human creators and chopping it up and using it in different ways, my mind, perhaps because my mind doesn't want to confront the consequences of that, my mind goes a bit blank and I'm tempted to move into my heart and talk about my feelings. And I just thought it might be appropriate, given that we're talking about humanity, to mention them. And that there's a deep sadness. There's a feeling of powerlessness. There's a feeling of, anything that I say, whether it's about the practicalities of class action lawsuits or protecting someone's intellectual property, those arguments are going to fall on deaf ears many, many times. I think, all I can do right now is feel a little bit sad about the fact that most people, many people, let's say, are more interested in making money than they are in making spiritual progress, making art. But you can always
Right.
find those people who are. You can always find those people who you look into their eyes and they haven't lost the soul yet and they get it
Yeah.
and they say, I want to sit down and dedicate 5 years of my life to writing a novel. Um,
Yeah.
and they look at other people and say, kind of what Duke Ellington said when he was asked what jazz was. He said, if you've got to ask, you'll never know. I sometimes have mixed feelings as a teacher. You can teach things, but I
Yeah.
think sometimes, you just the way I get through my day in this landscape is I do the most I can, as you see, to
Mhm.
write about this issue, talk about this issue. But other times, Ned, I have to say, let me get together with my people who know.
You're right, right. You
And
don't need to overthink it with some people.
yeah,
They're already there.
yeah.
Yeah, and so it comes back to the fact to that last line in the poem that you read so beautifully at the beginning, that the work is what matters, that the work is actually what we're doing here. The fact that it was published at the end or that it was read out loud, that's almost incidental to the process of work that we are doing on ourselves and the interactions we're doing with other people as we work through a work of fiction or a work of poetry or any art form. The process of the work is the connection with other people.
Well, it's connection with other people, and to be honest, I mean, if I really painted myself into a corner here, I would say that I have metaphysical beliefs about that as well. I mean, like anyone who spends his life doing this very seemingly absurd thing, writing poems,
Hmm.
writing novels, I have had to stay up long nights over my years and think about, what it is that draws me to do this and why I feel so called to it and what justifies it. Even at the moments in my life when and I'm a father, and when it's not
Hmm.
very financially lucrative, it's not, any of these things. So if I were really to paint myself in a corner metaphysically, I would say that yes, I believe that the work someone does
Hmm.
to create something beautiful and true, let me just say here, does something to and for the universe and for God and with God that I don't think can be articulated very clearly in summary and certainly is independent of the results. That I do believe, that's a core of something I believe. And that may sound like nonsense to some people. To me, it's a very core belief. And that's something that informs my sense that the work really matters, not just in a sense of personal betterment and individuation, which helps us become better ethical
Hmm.
neighbors to others. I think that's true too, but also in that other metaphysical sense. So,
Yeah. Well, thank you for articulating that so strongly. A couple quick notes on this as we move into the future, and hopefully the humanities revive as you forecasted. Um, I believe that human acts of genuine human creativity will matter increasingly because so much content, I'm using content with quotes around it,
mhm.
will be generated by AI. But I think genuine human creativity will still originate from human beings. So my thesis is that eventually you will pick out at a bookstore or in person, you'll pick out something human and you'll say, that's what I value. I mean, that's what I do today, but even more so as the world becomes more suffused with AI stuff.
I think so. The philosophically sort of educated process in me wants to then say, yes, that though is predicated on the notion that we will remain the same kind of human beings we are now, and therefore to want that. And I do have some fear
Yeah.
that we will, who knows what the next 25, 100, 500 years will look like. And if we start to become creatures that are not just biologically human, if we start to become things that allow ourselves to be variously implanted and chipped and all sorts of things. This sounds far-fetched, but so did AI 50 years ago. Then what do we become? Automated consumers who are wandering around what would have been a bookstore, but now we say, we don't take it for granted that we say, I want the human.
Yeah,
Now we say, I want this, that. So that sounds very kind of Orwellian. I understand
it
that.
does. It
But
does.
but I think that's why we need to be
Hmm.
on the lookout for protecting the human. Like the human is not something that's sentimental. Human beings are also creatures that commit genocides and are mean to children and do horrible things. So I don't need to sentimentalize what it is to be human. However, I think we understand that something that's completely detached from feeling, like an AI model, is dangerous for all the reasons we can imagine. So we've got to steer it in the direction of practicality, progress in sciences, progress in mathematical modeling of things, but then continue to improve as a human being and move toward a spiritual enlightenment, spiritual betterment. I think, in addition to the humanities, let's lump in there things that have become all too unfashionable.
Hmm.
Actual faith,
Yeah.
actual spirituality, not just the kind of Instagram variety, not just the kind of Christian nationalism that masks itself as belief. I think we're in a spiritual crisis, and we shouldn't pull punches about it. This is much larger than humanities. It's really about humanity. And I think that includes a crisis of faith that we have been undergoing, right, since at least the Enlightenment, if we can talk on such big terms. And we need to really look at that and think about that. And although protecting the separation of church and state, which is so enshrined and necessarily so in our culture in the United States,
Hmm.
I really think we need to have a deep soul searching on a personal level, on a
Hmm.
level with our communities, on a level with our families, about what it means to be a human being. And I think that has to include a sense of larger purpose.
Oh, I was just going to point out the irony that so many people in tech seem to be chasing this idea of AGI or artificial general intelligence or kind of AI almost as a god. And it's almost another religion that has emerged to fill a spiritual vacuum.
It's a terribly insightful point. I'm moved by that. I think that, yeah, I've often said that for some reason, we as human beings are built to worship.
Mm-hmm.
There is something in us that needs that higher power, that metaphysical sense of the world. And it turns out that when we deny that, it doesn't go away. It just
Yeah.
gets misplaced. And I think you're very right to say, if we think of that kind of religion as defined by a kind of blind faith in something, or looking up to some model, some truth that is larger than ourselves. And so it happens that way. If a lot of people wandering around calling themselves atheists, but their God is money, or their God is,
Right.
all sorts of other things. And so it just comes back to the fact, again, I'm not speaking from any place of self-righteousness.
Yeah.
I'm at least as flawed as my neighbor. But, what does it really look like to look at ourselves and say, I got to be honest with myself. These are the ways that I'm pretty flawed. These are the ways that things that I can work on, and how do I get better? That's the kind of
Well,
improvement.
and more than once, I've come face to face with my own flaws when I'm reading a novel and I'm seeing
Yeah.
somebody else's flaws on the page. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that's what I do. I
Yeah.
need to work on that. Or this is how it looks to other people because I'm seeing somebody else transmitting their own experience or even a fictional experience onto the page. And that becomes a communication bridge between that person's experience and my own. And that illuminates my own life in a way that is helpful.
And isn't it amazing that we're in a moment right now, historically,
Yeah.
people pause, as you and I are doing, and take inventory of like what makes us human. I mean, there are not every era, let me say it this way, necessitates those conversations on that level of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a unique opportunity for us because we can take a look at ourselves as human beings and say, kind of what we do when we grow up as individual human beings. What do I want to keep?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I want to leave by the wayside? And so it's just interesting that we're compelled to have that conversation right now.
Thank you for this lovely conversation in a time of struggle and of strife for the humanities. This is a bright light. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ned. And I never know, I try to silence that voice in me that says, what have we accomplished? And I always think, well, what we've accomplished is just having this conversation. And I appreciate the time and the space to do that. That is what it is to be human, right? Just to do that, and not to be worried about the little nuggets of truth that emerge, but the process of truth of emerging. So I thank you for it and creating this space.
Absolutely. And this episode will actually go live next week. So just before your new book comes out. So could you tell us a little bit about your new book, The Teacher, right?
Yes, thank you. My new book is called The Teacher, and it began as a series of little midnight reflections. As my young son was asleep, I would write down some things that I was thinking about in this troubled world we find ourselves in. And I wanted to pass along some experiences, if not wisdom, to my son. And the more I wrote, the more I realized I was writing a little story. And so The Teacher is a book about a father and a son on a journey. And along the way, the father pauses to teach his son what he thinks of as 6 great lessons, not realizing that he will soon be very humbled to discover that his son is going to teach him the biggest lesson of all. So it's a little book that I'm very proud of and have dedicated to my son, and that'll come out on December 1st from Maudlin House, and it's available now for pre-order. People can find it through the Maudlin House website or any of my social media feeds, and it'll come out in a beautiful hardcover and softcover edition in December. I'm excited to share that one with the world.
Well, thank you. We will make sure to link to the book so people can pre-order the book in the show notes. So
Thank you.
thank you again. I think that wraps this episode. I would like to mention to you that one of the things that our little company or institute does is we actually certify human people as creative, actual humans.
I like that.
So I'll send you a certification.
Nice.
That's okay with you.
That's very sweet. I like that. That's very nice.
Okay.
You can find out more about any of these news items and hear the complete interview on the extended premium version of our podcast at humanintelligence.news. Today's episode was produced by Ned Hayes and engineered by Muhammad Adnan. Our analog-only human-themed music was created for the Human Intelligence podcast by Josh Pinkston of Nature and Spirit. This episode, and every episode, is brought to you by the Human Intelligence Institute team. Thanks for listening to today's episode. As always, this episode is available online at humanintelligence.news.